And that was part 2 of the Vermont Movie here on Vermont PBS. And I'm joined again by Nora Jacobson, who is the executive director of the entire project. And then also Lloyd and Louise Michaels, who also directed individual segments within part 2. We will get to you in a moment. But Nora, first I want to talk to you. One of the main focuses of this was the progressive republicanism of the state of Vermont and how that found its roots and how it's gone forward from there. Progressive republicanism on its own, as you take the two words, seem a little oxymoronic, but talk to me a little bit about progressive republicanism and how it's woven its way into the fabric of Vermont, even today.
Yes. Well, I should say that piece, it's sort of a large part of part 2, and Rick Moulton also worked on that piece. So what we see is that kind of republicanism is really epitomized by George Aiken, who was first lieutenant governor, then senator. And so it's a kind of republicanism that's really rooted in the land, in the landscape, in farming. And so, as Frank Bryan so wonderfully says in the film, farmers have to be compassionate, gentle people, because if they're not, then their cows won't give milk. And so that has really found its way into the republicanism of Vermont. And I think to this day that still exists. I mean, I think people who work the land and who work with animals, no matter what their politics are compassionate, gentle people. And so that's why we talk about the rural Republicans versus Republicans like the Republican Party, which is a more national kind of thing. Now, I don't think this is uniquely a Vermont thing. I think a lot of the rural states in the United States had these kinds of rural Republicans, but I'm not sure they do anymore.
One of those uniquely Vermont things that may have come to pass, but eventually didn't. Lloyd, you directed the segment on the Green Mountain Parkway.
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about that segment. I'll be honest, I've lived here for 20 years. I had never even heard about the Green Mountain Parkway. Talk to me a little bit about this project and whether you think it may have been a bad idea to nix it at the time, whether or not it might have a history or a future going forward in the state of Vermont.
Mm-hmm. Well, this was a really exciting segment for me to get involved in, and I learned a lot doing it because it was a more complex event than I initially thought it was. I thought it was an example of, Vermont's early instinctive environmentalism, but it was more than that. For me, it was a challenge too because I have worked in documentary and I haven't directed actors. But we were lucky to have this wonderful Alex Charrington who played the role of James Taylor, and James Taylor was both the head of the Chamber of Commerce, and he was a visionary that started the Green Mountain Club, and he supported very vibrantly, as you see in the film, the idea of having the Parkway built along the ridge of the Green Mountains. And so I think the additional comments made by people, and Greg Guma helped me on the script for especially the acted parts, but the additional comments show how many factors came into play there. The job issue and economic development, the fear of some other ethnic groups coming into Vermont that Vermonters were not really comfortable with. And so I think it's a really interesting sort of picture of Vermont at that precise moment in 1935, right in the middle of the Depression, and what direction is Vermont going to go? Definitely, if it had been built, there probably would not be all the ski areas on the tops of the mountains now. So, which would have been better, I think. I hope this segment gets people thinking about those things.
Let's take a look at a clip. This is Lloyd and the Green Mountain Parkway from the Vermont Movie.
Big boys seem to be in favor of it, but the little guy's going to get left holding the bag.
A lot of downhillers, the business elite and professionals, supported the Green Mountain Parkway. But a lot of other downhill folk thought that it was a very bad idea, that it would mar the state's traditional beauty in that way, that it would hurt tourism. You know what downhillers are like? People like me. It was just that kind of issue, very divisive.
It was divisive indeed. Louise Michaels, you directed the segment on the Barrie Socialist Labor Party Hall in the Vermont Movie Part 2, Under the Surface. Tell me a little bit about the Labor Hall. You know, we're sitting here talking, you know, in future segments we talk about the hippie movement and everything else that's going on, and here we are talking about a building in Barrie. It seems like a small little part of Vermont history, but it actually is quite significant. Tell me a little bit about what drew you to this segment and why you directed a segment of this in the Vermont Movie.
Well, the building itself is a National Historic Landmark, and it was saved by a group of people in Barrie in the 90s from demolition. And it had been used throughout the 20th century for various uses after the socialists no longer owned it and made use of it for the original purpose. So they saved it, and it was interesting to me because I think that the idea that it represents a social community that built it in 1900, and the fact that Vermont was on an industrial international scale. It had people coming from Europe, from all different countries in Europe, which eventually a big community of Italians were behind funding it and getting the building itself built. It also predates certain things like the fact that it had possibly the first co-op store in the state, in the basement. It later had a co-op bakery, and they minted coins of their own, and they had products of their own. So those are some of the aspects. It also reflected a contrast in Vermont between the marble industry and the granite industry, which was part of what really drew me, the idea of workers' rights and what people were doing at the turn of the century to promote their own health and their own longevity in a particular field. They did not expect as workers to be so prone to a disease which for a while was being termed tuberculosis, but in fact was more specific to their work, which is silicosis. And Governor Aiken, which Nora mentioned before, as part of the Republicans, was very interested to see what could be done to, eliminate that health hazard. And it took fighting, protests and strikes, et cetera, to the 1930s to finally get a law in place that alleviated at least, a significant portion of the hazard that was part of their lives.
Okay, let's take a look at a clip, one of your clips from the Vermont Movie. This is Louise Michaels on the Barrie Socialist Labor Party Hall.
It was the headquarters for the Granite Cutters International Union.
Many people belong to the food cooperative in the basement, which I believe might be the first food cooperative in Vermont.
If we needed a loaf of bread and some milk or something, we'd just run down. My mother would send us down to get it.
It was economic, it was political, it was social, it was cultural. It was about friendships. It was about mutual support.
So that is part 2 of the Vermont Movie. Nora Jacobson, what do we have to look forward to in part 3? Refuge, reinvention, and revolution.
Well, those 3 words pretty much say it all. Vermont was a refuge for many different kinds of people over the years, right from the beginning and up until the present. Refugees from suburbia, refugees from other countries, refugees from cities. Reinvention, Vermont has always been a hotbed of invention, and now reinvention as people reinvented their lives. And revolution, well, certain people came to Vermont and they had a revolutionary outlook. They wanted to change the world, and some of them had tried to change the world before they came to Vermont and continue to do so.
Okay, Nora Jacobson, we look forward to part 3. Robin Lloyd, Louise Michaels, thank you very much for joining us. I'm Colin Parker. We will see you back here next time for part 3 of the Vermont Movie.